go here. Oh no,
That's me.
No. How do I do just me? Here we go. Okay. So thanks all for coming along this evening. I'm Christina. I am a content manager at Soldo, and in my spare time, I run Content UK, which is a community supporting and connecting UK content marketers. I'm really excited today to have Serena Chanday on board, and she's going to be teaching us all about how to harness digital PR and take your content further. And she's a real expert in this field. She used to be a journalist herself and is now a digital PR manager over at the agency Resignal. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So I know we're definitely in for a treat. How the format will work is Serena will talk for about 20-ish minutes, offering all her actionable tips. And then for the second half, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask any questions that you have of Serena. If you see underneath the video box, there's a question section. If you pop your questions in there throughout, at the end, we'll come back and answer those. Just a little bit more about Content UK before I pass over to Serena. So as I said, we're a community for UK content marketers, and what this involves is a close-knit community on Slack, and we also host lots of webinars from content experts. So a few ones that we've got coming up include a virtual meetup with women in content marketing. We've got a Q&A with the brilliant author Glenn Fisher, all about persuasive copywriting and talking about his book, The Art of the Click. We've got, for any in-house SEOs and in-house content marketers, we've got an event, I've got a webinar all about how content marketers and SEOs can collaborate in-house and the internal logistics of doing that. And that's with Tamara from IG Group and Adesola, my colleague from Soldo. So go to contentuk.co/events to see what's coming up. And if you do want to get involved in and speak at a webinar yourself, drop me a note and we can get something sorted out. I particularly encourage anyone who is from a Black and ethnic minority group and women to get in touch in particular. Okay, enough from me, and let's now hand over to Serena.
Cool. Okay, cool. So let me just get my slides up. We'll do the usual, can you see my screen?
I can see them. Can everyone else see those slides? Perfect.
Cool.
Okay,
that
was
cool. Sorry, I couldn't see half the screen
for
a minute, and I was like, oh my god. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about harnessing digital PR and how to take your content further. So before joining the world of digital marketing, I was a journalist, and I worked on publications like OK Online, as well as Cosmopolitan Middle East and BBC Good Food. And in November 2017, I did the unthinkable and I switched to the dark side. Now, I say this because as a journalist, and it's a general thing with journalists, and also from even when I was at university learning journalism skills, our tutors would always be like, never become a PR, stick to journalism, stick it out, or even do content writing, but not PR. That's obviously like long gone now. Journalism, you know, is becoming harder and harder to survive in. And so many journalists I know have switched to PR, more traditional PR, but I found myself in digital marketing. So yeah. And since working in the industry, I've landed like coverage on publications like NME, Huffington Post, Stylist, and Fortune for like a range of clients in sectors like lifestyle, car insurance, and all sorts of areas. So I've done a bit of everything. So from getting the attention of journalists to repurposing and getting the most out of your content, I'll be taking you through key aspects of digital PR strategy today. So I think we'll start with the basics, which is what is digital PR? Digital PR is also known as link building or outreach. It comes under a number of different names and forms, but yeah, it's more traditionally known as digital PR, and it's an SEO tactic that's been used for years to help websites rank higher in Google, and it also helps with raising brand awareness a lot of the time as well. So we use creative campaign concepts as a way to provide journalists with newsworthy headlines, but we're also trying to provide them with an incentive to acquire links in the form of an interactive asset. So giving them something that gives them a reason to link back to our stuff. And over the years, it's evolved a lot. So there used to be quite seedy methods, such as posting guest posts on publications that were full of links to the person's clients. People also used to spam blog post comments with links, and they used to also hide links on pages. So literally doing that by making their text white and stuffing a load of links into the pages. But it has evolved now, and we try to create client campaigns that will benefit journalists as much as it will benefit the client. So by that, we mean sharing new data, stories that create newsworthy headlines, and things that journalists wouldn't necessarily have the time to research themselves. And campaigns can be made in a range of formats, but typically they tend to form as interactive assets and tools. So this is a recent one I worked on for a pension client. And what you do is you type in your current job title, and it'll come up with a ton of different options for alternative jobs that you can transfer your skills to. And so that was one fun way to get journalists to link. Another great campaign is this one, which looked at animals that had gone extinct, and it was a campaign for Expedia by Verve Search. And so illustrations are another great way to get coverage, because you're giving the journalist another interesting asset that people will quite often click into and explore. And then other formats that also work are data visualizations like maps and tables. The clearer the better. Basically, you're giving journalists a ton of new data that they didn't previously have access to, but you're also providing it in an easily digestible format. And other campaigns like quizzes and games are quite popular, and infographics are more of an old school tactic, but they are making a comeback every now and then. And when they're done correctly, they're great for landing loads of links as well. And I wanted to share some essential tips and guidance for when you're pitching journalists. So the most crucial element is remembering that journalists are time poor. When I worked at OK Online, I had to do a minimum of 8 stories in a 7-hour shift. And I had to get a minimum of 1.2 million views a month with those stories. So there's a lot of pressure. And this is really important to keep in mind when you're trying to get a journalist's attention. Constantly be thinking, how can I make their life easier? Am I wasting their time with this? Is it something that they'd bother writing up to get those views that they need to get every month? And what I go on about a lot to my team and people I've worked with is the subject line is the most crucial part of any email. Put bluntly, if you can't entice a journalist to open your email, there's no chance of you getting coverage. And what I always think is one of the best methods is, can you see your subject line as a headline? So if you were scrolling through Twitter, or you were scrolling through a publication like one of the sections like lifestyle or general news, if you were looking through that and you saw your subject line as a headline, would you click into it? And usually that you can instantly say yes or no to that. Another way, and another great tip that I've had, is if you had just run up a hill and you had about 2 breaths to get your story out, what would you say and how would you get your story across as quickly and easily as possible? So they're generally the 2 things to keep in mind when you're writing subject lines. But also personalization can help when you're targeting publications. And by that, I mean reading through your target publications, because you'll obviously have built a list of titles that you want to get coverage in. Look through their sections and see how they're wording their headlines and mirror it, but obviously not to an extent. So not so you're, copying things like with tabloids where they write revealed or shocking in capital letters. Try to avoid things like that. Just keep in mind the way they'd formulate a headline. Try to also spell out the story in the subject line and at the beginning of the email. So the journalist should really get the gist of everything you're trying to get across, including key parts of data or any important quotes or any important factors from the campaign, like from the subject line within the first 2 paragraphs of your pitch. Remember, journalists also care more about the story than the brand. So I was working with a radio client recently, and initially their pitches were blah, 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 radio station has launched this initiative for this. It was a really lovely initiative. But as much as we care about our clients and we care about our brands, the journalist doesn't. They just want to know what they're getting from this and how their story is going to get clicks. So if you must, put it right at the end. So this heartwarming initiative was launched to connect elderly people and millennials, and it was launched by X radio station. So this is an example of a subject line that I've done recently. So data study reveals 1 in 5 Brits run to improve their mental health. Now I've highlighted data and study. So in general, I tend to do the brackets, which help really well to sort of give the journalist an idea of exactly what they're getting. So in terms of the like visual pieces, I do in brackets illustration or video. For this, it'd be data or survey. And I've also let them know that it's a study, so they generally assume that they're going to be getting new data that's just come out. Then I've highlighted 1 in 5 Brits. This is another way of making data really stand out. Sometimes you don't always get the data that you want from a campaign, so it's not always the sort of headline grabbing statistics. Like I would have wanted this to say 60 or 70% of Brits. Unfortunately, our survey, because of the way it was conducted, said it was only like 20% of Brits. So you've got to find ways to sort of make your data sound more interesting. And 1 in 5 Brits went down much better than when we had it previously as a percentage. Subject lines also take multiple attempts. So initially I thought it'd just be write it out, that's it, you've nailed it. And I was quickly told that a good subject line takes about 20 attempts. So literally writing in a notepad or on a Word document, I prefer writing things down on paper, and forcing out 20 subject lines, which is really difficult when you've only got a handful of words to work with. I try to, as a rule of thumb, keep subject lines at 12 words. Sometimes it can be more, and that's fine, but try and keep the less important parts of the story towards the end, so that if they do get cut off and a journalist glances, they've got exactly what they want. So yeah, write out those 20 subject lines. Really try and be creative with it, and don't be afraid to also ask colleagues or friends if they have any feedback on it. Fortunately, I've got some journalists who are friends, so I'll sometimes message them and be like, would you open this if I sent it to you? And it really does make a difference. So sometimes I'll be so set on a subject line, I'll be like, right, I'm ready to go. Can you just have a quick look, like quick once over? And they'll come back to me and say, oh no, actually, I wouldn't open that. Can you try this? And I'll be like, oh my God, of course, that makes so much sense. But because we're working on campaigns from start to finish, we get so involved, so it's easy to sort of get caught up in it. So yeah, try and get a second opinion and don't just take your first attempt. But when you get it right, it can go really well. So a lot of the times when we know we've done well with a subject line is when the publication almost mirrors what we've said in our subject line as their own headline. So this is an example for news.com Australia, and they've just done a few bits to personalize it, but they've kept the gist of it and then really had a dig at Australia for their poor electric car uptake. Another example of the Mirror, tiny bit of rewording, and then the Independent literally used 25 endangered language you need to listen to before they disappear. So when you've done it word for word, you've smashed it. And you also need to remember whether you have everything a journalist would need in your email. There wouldn't be nothing that bugged me more as a journalist when I'd have to go back and forth to a PR and be like, you've forgotten images, you've not given me any quotes, or you've not given me, I used to write event listings. So it'd be like, you've not given me the time and date of this event. So, what were you expecting me to do from your email? And so from broken down data to like easily digestible tables and easily summarized, to links to images and video galleries and campaign or content to providing expert comment, make sure you have all of these things in your email once you're ready to click send. I also wanted to talk about the power of expert comment and authoritative content. So quotes are essential for outreach. I find them really, really important. So when I worked at OK Online, my stories were 12 lines long. I already told you how long, my shift was and how many minimum stories we had to get out. So you can sort of imagine it wasn't just 12 lines. It was also finding 5 images to go within the piece. It was writing the social teasers as well. It was editing a holding image. So basically there's a lot that goes into each story. It's not just write 12 lines, it's good to go. So try and keep it as relevant to the story as possible and give journalists plenty to work with. Initially, the go-to is your client. And this is fine as long as you're keeping it as relevant to the topic as possible, but make sure that they aren't salesy or commercial at all. As soon as a journalist sees a quote that's quite like product focused or brand focused, they're instantly turned off and they won't be using it. So this is why I generally tend to use quotes from industry experts. And you might want to try using what my go-to sort of method is going to Twitter. So whether I'm looking for like psychologists or lawyers or academics, I always go to Twitter and I use the journal request hashtag. And I've got a whole blog post here that talks you through the whole process. All you really need is a Twitter account. It doesn't matter if you've got 5 followers or 500. You always get the same results if you're using the right hashtags. And try and utilize existing content. Sometimes you won't even need to ask anyone. You can just go on your website and find an authoritative piece of content that can be reused for expert comment or for expert tips. And this can also form a pitch in itself if you're trying to do a bit of like quick reactive digital PR. So try and familiarize yourself with all the sections and articles on a site to try and find any piece of content that may appeal to journalists in the current news cycle. This is great for like quick and easy wins. For example, recently, I'm working with a sportswear client, and given that lockdown has seen a massive boost in the number of runners and the number of people, doing home workouts, I wanted to look into like ways to avoid injuries and, tips for like starting out running or like, how to get to marathon level. And initially I'd said to my team, I think we'll need to get an expert on board. Let's speak to the client and see if they'll be able to share something with us. And my colleague goes, no, there's a whole section on the website dedicated to like running tips and how to run for beginners. So instantly that cuts so much time. It means a bit of rewriting and rewording, but that's a pitch in itself there. And that's a quick, easy way to get links and coverage. For a finance client, I'd also see if there are any tips on saving, investing, or any standout statistics that might be surprising. And the reason I say this is because this is also a really good way to harvest content for social media. It's gradually becoming more and more popular, and it's a great way of increasing followers and engagement. It's something I've been seeing on Twitter a lot. And like Monzo are quite good with it, but also there are individuals trying to build a brand and their popularity on social media. So this girl Kay, she's just shared some really simple statistics, and as you can see at the bottom, it's got like 900 retweets and over 2,000 likes. And that's she then linked later down to the article that she got this information from. But just by taking that existing content and putting it in an easily digestible format, it's a great way for her to sort of build her brand and increase engagement. Again, this guy has tons of threads. He's always posting threads and information on a range of topics. And, thinking about this while using your brand's content that you're working with, your client's content that you're working with, there's just so many opportunities where you can actually turn something that's quite a wordy, massive, article into something that's really easily digestible and can help people as well as grow, coverage and popularity for your brand. You can also do this on Instagram. This is one example again. So I've seen a lot of this during the Black Lives Matter movement that's sort of been gaining traction recently. And there have been so many helpful Instagram carousels full of information about resources, about tips, about history. Try and find ways that you can adapt this to your brand. So like this brand, Fuck Being Humble, there were 5 or 6 slides in this carousel, and it was just simple tips. It doesn't need to be anything long-winded, but it's taking your content, making it easily digestible, and trying to find different ways to repurpose it. As a recap, Question whether your campaign idea or your content is actually newsworthy. Have a proper think about it. I generally needed to get, I can't remember, about 20,000 views on average per day to be able to hit my target. Some days, if I had a breaking story, I'd get like 100,000 in a day. But try and think about how your content can help that journalist get the views that they need. Getting your subject line right is crucial. I think I've harped on about this enough, but if you have any questions, you're always welcome to ask me. And using expert quotes or authoritative content when pitching to journalists is really helpful, and it's a quick and easy way to gain coverage on a campaign that either you're just launching or has gone stale. I recently brought a campaign back to life that had been quite stale for about 3 months, just by getting a new expert on board, and that was an instant piece of stylist coverage that I got. And also find ways to repurpose your content for digital PR campaigns and social media. Look at what you've already got rather than digging for hours and trying to find new stats, new sources of data, and see what you've already got to your disposal. Thank you very much, and feel free to tweet me or email me if you have any questions ever at all.
Will agree. Do you mind just taking off your slides and then I can pop your fire up?
I think I've done that.
Yeah, thank you. That was so useful, particularly all the stuff about subject lines. Like, I wouldn't have thought that much detail goes into
Yeah.
That was really.
When you think about it, as in that is make or break, your email may, all that hard work that you put into writing a pitch may never ever be seen if you mess up your subject line. So yeah.
Yeah, it could be so easily just be an afterthought when you put all the work into the main pitch, but that's the initial hook. Lots of thank yous from everybody. I'm just going to.
Welcome.
So some questions that people had while we're on subject lines. Ahmed had asked, what are your thoughts about using emojis in subject lines?
I've been asked this before, and I obviously still speak to a lot of my old colleagues from OK and from other publications. Our general feeling towards emojis is please don't use them. They look really like marketing-y and spammy. Like, it looks like, you know, if you're signed up to a fashion brand and they're like, oh, hot new summer styles, and there's a little sun. I wouldn't look at that and think, oh, that's a story. I'd think, oh, that's a bit of PR for product rather than stories. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
That's heartbreaking to hear, but good to know.
I'm sorry.
Arij has asked, in terms of repurposing content, what's the best way to kickstart auditing our existing content and defining what's worth outreaching and what's not? Brackets, current task we're doing.
It's quite hard to say because obviously websites have tons of content. Look at the news agenda, work backwards. So look at what's currently being covered. Like, you know, I know Arij works for Zoopla, and obviously there's been that announcement today about stamp duty. So try and see what you've got on there. If you're trying to, you know, do a campaign, look at anything you've got towards that. It can just be expert tips. Expert tips campaigns work so well. And also looking at, you know, I'm sure there'll be a spike in Google Trends today and over the next week over stamp duty. So that's a great way to add in an extra newsworthy hook, and just see any tips or advice you've got. Try and get an internal spokesperson from Zoopla to speak in a very unbranded way about, you know, properties and prices and what it means for new buyers, things like that. Expert ways you can sort of help the journalist with what they must be already digging for. If that answers your question.
Another question actually from me on the repurposing, and Arij just said great tip there. You know, if you've got current content that you're pitching out, are there any concerns if the publication like duplicates a lot of the SEO wise, if they duplicate loads of the actual original content? Do you ever find that?
I would personally do, if you're asking, like, if I'm pitching like website content that's already on the platform, I would rewrite it anyway a little bit. I'd try and repurpose it. Campaigns generally have a tone of voice, and it's something that we've been talking about at work recently. You know, journalists want something that's quite simple and easily digestible, whereas your on-site copy is generally quite detailed and, you know, really sort of in depth. Try and take the top lines from it, break it down into bullet points and tips rather than paragraphs and blocks of text. And that's what I think would probably solve that issue.
Okay, thank you.
That's right.
Oh, Mary, can you share the slides? Yes, we will be, you'll get an email with the slides, a replay of this, and some of the blog posts that Serena referenced as well. Any other questions from people? Do pop them in the question section. But when it comes to finding which publications you should be outreaching to for your target audience, and like specific people, job roles, and people you should be contacting with the outreach, how do you go about gathering that information?
I did have a whole section in another talk I'd done about prospecting, but I'll sort of talk you through it. So my starting place with prospecting is, for example, I recently did like that running mental health campaign. So what I did was I went to Google News and I searched for running and mental health together, and I saw who was writing about it. This was sort of more UK based outreach because it had a UK survey with it. So what I did was I started like filtering down the people who had written about it. This process usually ends up with me having about 50 tabs open. So I'll create a little spreadsheet and I'll start writing down, the website and the journalists' names and emails for who's covering it. So that's step one, and that's really the most targeted way to, try and find the right prospects. Then you'll also usually, like, we tend to ask brands and clients that work with us, where are their competitors getting links that they would like links from? So ideally that would be publications. I'm not really too experienced with getting coverage on like tourism boards or like universities. But they'll generally have a wish list of targets, and also any publications with the sections that you're outreaching. So, for Go Compare, I made sure to include all motoring sections. So you start building that list out. Then I use a media database. So I use Gorkana. There are loads of others out there, and I'll look for like journalists in that sector. A lot of the time, those journalists have moved on with the way that journalism is constantly changing. So I go to their Twitter or I go to the publication website and I look at the author pages and see when they last published something. And that's sort of how I tend to do my prospecting.
That's really interesting. Your screen has disappeared, by the way. We can still hear you, but there's a black screen that's appeared, just FYI.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Great. I'm glad.
But that's quite interesting, using Twitter to outreach and different methods. That's very interesting. Arij has oh no, hang on, lots of questions coming through.
Yeah, suddenly they were all started coming through.
So a question from Mark, is pitching by phone now dead?
Yeah, to be honest, like you sort of, if I've given you an idea of how busy a Newsdesk is, it's probably busier than ever now because teams have stripped back, people are on furlough. Unless your story's breaking and you think the world needs to know about it, like it's a story like the stamp duty thing today, it's probably not worth following up via phone. I also tend to stick to one follow-up max, unless I've seen the journalist open the email about 15 times and I'm like, guys, what are you doing? Do you want anything else? But generally stick to one follow-up and please don't badger them by phone. Yeah, that's my personal opinion. I know other people might still do it, but as someone who used to be a journalist and used to get calls from PRs, I'd be like, what on earth are you doing? I've got, 8 stories to get out plus breaking news in between. So yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't cut through the noise.
No.
Okay. Is there like a particular day or time of day that's ideal, or does that not make a difference much to getting a response?
This is something else I cut out because I thought, I don't want to make this too long-winded. So I'll go back to the basics. So when I was at OK, I worked 1 week of late and 1 week of early. So lates were 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. and earlies were 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then sometimes I'd be on weekends, and those shifts were 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. So that was mine, and it was changing weekly. Sometimes I'd have to step in for a colleague and take her shift. So from that, you can sort of gauge there's no best time. I personally don't think there's any best time to pitch a journalist. What I will say is, to increase your chances of success, when you're like prospecting on the day of outreach, go to the sections of the publications that you're outreaching to. Say you're only doing about 20 publications, and see which journalists have written the 3 to 5 most recent pieces, and they're generally the people who will be on the desk. So yeah, no best time, but there are ways you can sort of maximize your chances.
That's a good little nugget there. Another question from Arij. In terms of tracking the success of our subject lines, any other metrics other than open rate that we should keep an eye out for? Generally, any metrics related to email tracking that we could keep an eye out on, we use BuzzStream.
I was talking to my colleague about this today because we'd sent an email out that we were a bit stressed out about. And she said, oh, have you heard back from this person? I said, no, they've only opened it twice. She was like, I always forget that's part of your job. It's really creepy. I was like, yeah, you know, bit stalkery, but I enjoy being able to. Other than that, there's not really anything I could suggest. Like, we look at open rates and I look at the number of opens. Once I've sent out a piece of outreach, sometimes it can be to like 10 people, sometimes it can be to 50. I will be religiously staring at the opens for the next like half hour. And that's sort of the best metric you can look at. Unless obviously they get back to you, in which case it's a black and white, yes, no, we're interested, we're not interested. But yeah, other than that, there's not really anything I would suggest.
And how long do you tend to take to do a follow-up? How long do you leave it?
I leave it 3 to 5 days. Never follow up the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Following up after 2 days is fine as well, but I just think just give them a bit of time, especially at the moment, especially because teams are like stripped back, people are on leave. So yeah, 3 to 5 days.
Okay. Mark, he asked about the best time of day as well, and also has asked, how do you go about pitching to journalists over a weekend?
It's the same thing. Sometimes, you know, I had to do 1 weekend a month on OK, and you know, my colleagues would have to do the same. Some people ended up getting lumped with weekends more. It's exactly the same thing. The one thing I would say is lighter stories like quizzes or like just general lighter, less breaking newsy type pieces. Try and pitch them maybe on a Friday. Sometimes the feedback I've had from my friend who works at the Metro now is, you know, they're great to bank for weekend stories. But again, if you sent them during the week to the right person, they themselves would bank it for the weekend. So yeah.
Okay. And sort of following up from that one, Mark's asked, do all publications have a similar system of shift working, or is this solely lifestyle or men's/women's interest magazines?
So generally it tends to be shifts. But then I was speaking to this friend who's at the Metro and she's doing 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., but then the odd weekend as well. So, and also from other friends I have, like they end up doing crazy shifts and weird hours. It depends on the section. So yeah, I think shifts do exist. It's what makes being a journalist so hard because you never have any balance. So yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realise that journalists has such wild.
It was fine. If I had like just earlies, I would have been fine. I probably would have stuck it out a lot longer. But yeah, you just didn't know whether you were coming or going.
That's quite wild. Mary has asked, do you have a minimum number of prospects that you make sure you reach, or does it not really matter?
You know, like I'm trying to think. So for that mental health running one, I knew that I'd be able to hit up a minimum of about 20 UK publications. Some are broader, some I can have like hundreds, some I can have about 20. But yeah, usually, I mean, if you're creating a campaign, you're creating it with a fair bit of budget behind it, and you're trying to get more than, you know, 3 or 4 pieces of coverage out of it. So it just depends how big your campaign is, but you should usually have no problem finding about 20 publications that will cover it.
Okay. And question from Mark. How do you work out the best story or angle from data, and how do you prioritize them if you feel there are good ones? And if there are multiple stories, how long do you leave between pitching different angles?
Oh, that's a really good question. How do I find the best angle? I'm trying to think. So with this running one recently, you know, we had the times of day that people run. So we found out that I think it was, I can't remember, it was a weird result. So I thought, oh, I think it was Londoners were the least, what's that word? Least regular, least consistent runners. And initially I thought, oh, great, that's good. Londoners, you know, we act like we're all like running every morning and we're all fitness addicts. So I went out with that angle. Well, no, I initially was going to go out with that angle. And then I was like, no, but mental health is a massive topic. And I personally would be more interested in reading that number of people that run for mental health. So I think it's sort of using a personal gauge to try and figure that out, and also seeing what's in the current climate and see what people are covering in that area. So, you know, if you've got a like go compare as a client, see what people are covering in motoring and look back over time. Also use BuzzSumo. That's quite good to see what stories are working well in certain areas. And that will generally tell you sort of where to go with it. And what was the other part of the question?
If there are multiple stories, how long do you leave between pitching different angles?
Okay. So obviously it's quite hard to have like 15 or 10 journalists to pick from. I would generally leave it. I'd try and go to different people with a new angle. I'd always go back to the general Newsdesk email address, but yeah, I would try and leave it like at least 10 days, really. That's not like written in stone, but it's enough time to have like let that pass. And if your angle's different enough, they shouldn't really mind if you go back within a week. But yeah, just try not to hound them like 2 days later when you've realized, oh God, actually that angle wasn't all that. And it's always best when you notice in the follow-up stage, because if you're about to follow up 3 days later and you realize that angle got nothing in its open rates, that's a really good time to pivot as well.
Okay. Good tip there for when you should pivot.
I think Danny asked about what software I use to track open rates. I use BuzzStream. It's what I've always used since I started in digital PR. But to send follow-ups, I tend to use Streak, which is free to an extent. And then I think you have to pay for it after a while. I don't know the ins and outs, but I know that that lets me see the number of opens. It's just not as in-depth as BuzzStream.
Okay, Streak. Is that called Streak?
Streak.
STREAK?
Yeah. I forgot how to spell it too there. Yeah, Streak's good, and it's like a Chrome add-on and a Gmail add-on.
Question from Emma. Do you email editors and journalists at the same publication about the same campaign, or is that a big no-no? Good question.
I email about two people from the same desk, whether that's an editor or a reporter. You know, generally there tends to be communication within a team. So, you know, we all had, like when I was at OK, bit of insider knowledge, we had a Trello board and we could see the stories being added to everyone's Trello cards, and we'd know what everyone was working on. So sometimes I'd be halfway through a piece that I'd quickly seen was breaking. So, you know, some Love Island contestant was cheating or some rubbish like that. And then I'd quickly go back to Trello and I'd be like, oh God, someone's been writing that up for like 5 minutes longer than me. But that was on like Showbiz. I think on other publications, they probably have better sort of ways of delegating the stories out. So it's fine. Yeah, basically it's fine to email about 2. Don't email 5 people on the same desk. You've burnt through contacts, and you know, then it can get a bit confusing.
Yeah. Okay. Question from Abdul. If you could give only one tip on how to get through to journalists, what would it be, apart from the good subject line?
Yeah. God. Thorough prospecting, making sure you're writing to the right person. You know, dig a bit deeper. Just because they say they cover tech, they may cover something within tech that's, you know, they may cover security, whereas you've got, you know, a big data piece on the history of, I don't know, mobile phones. So make sure you're digging a bit deeper. And if I can cheat and say one more tip, it would be, you know, I don't believe in the whole you have to have relationships with journalists to be able to get coverage. We're outreaching to so many people across so many different verticals. I'll be doing health one day, motoring the next day, and you know, whatever else. I can't have relationships with 100+ journalists. Keep an eye on their Twitter, engage with them. Like, the best way I found, and that's how I've got so many journalists following me now, is just sort of engaging with journalists, following them, and doing it naturally as well, rather than being like, oh my God, I love your story, you're such an amazing writer. They can see right through that. So just, yeah, sort of engaging with journalists and understanding their niches.
So like light touch engagement,
Yeah.
retweeting, odd comment here and there.
Yeah, and also just following to keep on top of like the pulse of what they're covering.
Cool. Okay, question from Neil. Do you recommend putting in several quotes from different experts, or just select one that you think is the strongest?
Both work. Both work. I've had 3 different experts for a pitch before, and I've had, I often use just one. That's easier for me. It's less time consuming. I'm just coordinating with one person, and that person always feels better as well, because remember that these people are giving their time to comment on your campaign. So they're obviously wanting to try and get coverage out of it. And I tend to try and get a link back, or at least like them properly accredited in the article. So if you're balancing 3 people and you're trying to get them all credited within the piece, plus your client, it makes life harder. But it's been done before, and I've got coverage for all experts before, so it's not impossible.
Takes a bit of skill. Okay, what's the next one? Danny, do you track which publications / journals give out the most links? If so, which are they?
No, I don't. I think you can go and do all those big studies and that, but some people say, "Oh, this publication never links out." I really wanted coverage on Stylist for years. I think it's because I always wanted to write for them. So I always wanted coverage on Stylist for a digital PR campaign, and for years I tried, and then I started at Resignal, where I am now, and within my first bit of outreach, we landed Stylist. So you can do all that research, but as long as your story's good and you're targeting the right people, you can cut through the noise and sometimes get a link. We used to be told that X publication, we'd see people tweeting saying, oh, this publication never links out, or this publication never gives us coverage, and then we'd land links there. Or sometimes someone who'd been linking for ages suddenly stopped, like adding links in or covering our pieces. So yeah, I wouldn't narrow it down to that.
Yeah, keep focusing on the story.
Yeah.
Damon, would you always target the general news desk?
Yeah, I would. I think it's a good way of making sure it gets to everyone's inbox. But a lot of the time, I'd ignore general news desk emails, because I'd be like, oh, well, if it was really important for me, then they would have sent it directly to me. So it doesn't hurt. And sometimes your editor will spot it and put it on your list without you looking at the news desk email. So yeah, it doesn't hurt.
Okay. Veronica joining now. Sorry for late, just got off call. Gemma, we're wondering whether to hire a PR agent because we're not experts. What would be a good rate to pay a PR freelancer, and what qualities should we look for?
I have no clue about the freelance rates. I'm really sorry. I don't know how much to pay them. Qualities to look for, proven track record of landing links. It depends if it's for traditional or digital PR. Yeah, I don't really have too much to say on that, other than, there are things I look out for. Obviously, give a test as well. Tests help to filter people down. But yeah, it would just be seeing what coverage they've landed before, how willing they are to learn as well, because digital PR is a whole different ballgame. And, you have to be adaptable and be ready to learn new skills. I'm always learning new ways to do things. During lockdown, I've watched so many webinars where I've learned so many different tips. And even though I've been in the game for 3 years, I'm still learning. So yeah, someone who's not stuck in their ways.
Yeah. Okay. Mary, do journalists actually read / pick up emails we send to the general news desk if it's not addressed to a specific journalist?
I think I've basically answered that. If I caught it, well and good. If not, my editor would generally catch it, and he'd put it on our news list if he deemed it worth publishing. So yeah, if it's good enough and if the story's good enough, then it will find a way to us.
Mhm. And Emma has asked, sort of following on from that, how much difference does personalizing each outreach email make when you're sending out the press release?
I don't personalize each email. I never have, and yeah, it's worked fine for me. You can do, but it depends how much you're personalizing it. If you're personalizing it, say, I read. I'm only saying this because a journalist, a friend of mine, was recently talking to me about it, and she was like, when they're like, "Oh, I read your article, and I really loved it," it doesn't entice them anymore to cover your piece. So yeah, personally, I've never personalized emails, except for the subject lines to try and make them more targeted. But I would never be like, "Hey, I saw your recent article," or "Hey, I saw this recent piece that you covered. Would you be interested in this?" I don't think it adds anything to them.
That, that's
Yeah.
good to
We're
know.
just literally looking for the best story and like something that will get us clicks. So if you keep thinking like that and think, you know, is my story good enough? Would it get clicks? That's generally a gauge, and you won't need to personalize it.
That's good to know. Unnecessary work to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
personalize. Mark has asked, how does outreach differ between traditional and digital PR, and how do you get in both print and online?
Um, okay, so traditional PR is more product focused and more brand focused. I don't love working with traditional PR teams, both as a journalist and as a digital PR. They are very brand, 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 and that's fine. But if you're doing it in the digital PR world, you're going to straight away be asked to pay for a link or pay for coverage. So I think we have very different ways of working and two very different purposes. I respect traditional PRs for them trying to get, product coverage or like, brand news. For us, our purpose is to get you ranking higher in Google. By doing that, we're creating a story that will give a journalist a reason to link to us. So it's two very different worlds, but yeah, I do struggle, working with traditional PR teams. Um, and how do you get in both print and online? Is that how do you get coverage in both print and online? If so, that's sort of never really been the purpose. We've accidentally got print coverage for clients in the past. Like I remember when I was at Verve, we had Babylon Health, and we did this campaign called National Stress, and it was about using Twitter to sort of decipher how stressed people were around the UK to do with commuting, I think it was. And Time Out covered it, got a bunch of other coverage, but Time Out covered it in print as well, and they gave it a full page. We were happy with it, the client was happy with it, but it wasn't like, oh, amazing, that's it, work done. It was just a little bonus. So I guess what helped is I think we created a heat map, and that helped giving really nice visual assets. Yeah, like the what is it? The animals that had become extinct. That was again a really lovely visual campaign, and that got print coverage. I remember. So yeah, visual assets seem to help with getting print coverage.
Okay, good tip to get into print there. George, what was the best thing that you learned about digital PR during the lockdown? And also, who excites you as an example when it comes to outreach?
Okay, what was the best thing I learned? Oh God, this is really annoying. I'm trying to think. Um, I mean, annoyingly, this was from a conversation with a friend, and she sort of reiterated the fact that we're she's shopping editor on Manchester Evening News, and she said, she used to be on Refinery. No, was it Pretty 52, which is now Tyler for Lad Bible? But basically, she was a social media editor. So if you were sending her assets with like videos or cool content that they can turn into like um, things that they can share on social media. Like now we've got to take social media into account and how many shares it will get and how much engagement it will get on social media. So thinking about stories in that way. I also learned about repurposing content, like a lot more about repurposing content from a webinar that I watched in lockdown. And that was really interesting and eye opening to me because, you know, not only is threads that get tons of attention helpful for social media engagement, but it's also helpful for potentially attracting a journalist's attention and them turning that into a story. So that was something that, I found really helpful. Who excites me as an example when it comes to outreach? Are you talking about people? Is it to do with people?
I'm not sure. Could you clarify on that one, George? And Arij has also made a comment from before saying, feels like rather than waste time on personalization and so on, dedicate that time to refining our angles and stories.
Yeah. As I said, you could write the loveliest email to someone, but if that story is not relevant, they can't do anything with it.
Okay, that is, unless George messages about the outreach question. Oh, she has? Okay. So she meant people or just any kind of sources like a YouTube channel, any good content communities?
So Twitter is the number one place to find good digital PR inspiration. I follow loads of great people in the digital PR community. And I checked last night actually because I didn't know how to find out what list I was in, but I'm in a ton of digital PR tips and people threads. Some great people to follow off the top of my head would be Ruth Barrett, Laura Hampton. I'm going to feel really bad because I'll have forgotten people. Saffron Shergirl. These are just people I've interacted with recently, so I'm feeling the pressure. Basically, go on Twitter, follow like different agencies and different people. Yeah, thanks, Arij, and follow me. And yeah, it's sort of a great way to engage, and you can always ask us. Like, we're always so happy to share insights and tips. And often that's how you'll find the resources, because we'll share our blog posts or we'll share like videos or webinars and stuff that we're attending, and that's how I've found everything that I've learned through lockdown. So yeah.
And to reiterate what Ree just said, follow Serena. She gives loads of good tips on Twitter. At Serena Chande. Is saying Serena is so informative and funny on Twitter. Following her was such a blessing this lockdown. I completely agree.
Nikki's amazing. Nikki's incredible. Her content is insane. I think her Twitter's the Nikki Diaries. But yeah, she's incredible. So yeah, there's just loads of great people to follow on Twitter, and it's a lovely community, and everyone's quite helpful and willing to share their knowledge.
Love the Twitter community.
Yeah.
Nikki, do you want to post your Twitter in the chat as well, Sue?
Oh yeah. Sure.
And anyone else that wants to share their Twitter, go ahead. We'll
do share yours because I want to follow more people.
Do a quick Twitter.
It does my head in. I can't help myself, but get involved. Oh, I've also seen Danny said join the digital PR subreddit too. I haven't explored that. Oh God, I'm a bit scared.
Digital PR subreddit. Oh, I forgot about Reddit.
Oh, that's also another great place to find digital PR inspiration. That's another thing I learned in lockdown. I can't remember who shared the thread. There was a thread on Twitter about how to harness Reddit for digital PR campaign ideas. And I found that really, really helpful. And it's something that I've sort of dabbled in, but if I can find this thread again, I'll post it on my Twitter. But yeah, very helpful.
Amazing. Okay, has anyone got any final questions? And do you have any final words or things you want to share, Serena? Reed, I've learnt so much.
Oh, I'm glad. Danny shared the digital PR Reddit as well, so I'm going to have a geek out at that this evening.
Veronica said, awesome webinar. Damon, thanks to you both. Yeah, thank you, Serena. That was so good.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure having you on board. And as we said, we'll be sending over the slides and play. Even if you have been frozen for the last 15 minutes. I didn't want to tell you, but I can tell you now it's finished, unfortunately.
Oh, was it really? Do you know what? Work have got into the habit of screenshotting really ugly sort of screenshots of me. So
actually, apparently she's not frozen for anyone else, it's just for me.
Oh, so. Well, I'm lucky.
Hopefully the recording you won't be frozen.
I hope so.
Okay, thank you again. Thanks everyone for coming along. And
thank you so much for sitting through an hour of me rambling. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad you found it helpful.
It was brilliant. So many things to go and try out now. Have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Stop broadcast.